What's up guys, it's Topsy and welcome back to the channel. So a few days back, I went ahead and did a video where I broke down and reviewed Team APS's interview with a former Konami employee that played a really big role in the production of Speed Duels. And in that video, one of the interesting topics that was mentioned, I wanted to go ahead and dive a bit deeper on. And that topic being the potential of Speed Duels visiting other formats like 5Ds, with their Synchro monsters, Zexal with visiting Xyz monsters, and etc, etc. And I feel like this is a really interesting topic to tackle when it comes to Speed Duels, just because in my personal opinion, I think Speed Duels ended way too quickly, and I'm not even referring to it because I feel like we could have done more with other formats, but because I think we could have still done a lot more with what we had available to us, with the DM era and the GX era as well. But nevertheless, this still got me thinking, what would have been the optimal point for Speed Duels to have ended? Would it have been the 5Ds era? Would it have been Zexal? Hell, Arc V? Brains even? I feel like there's a lot of pros and cons to each of these formats that I kind of want to go ahead and break down with you guys and explain where exactly I think we could have benefited, where we could have gone down like a slippery slope with. And finally, I want to go ahead and conclude with my personal opinions on what I personally think would have been the optimal point for Speed Duels to have ended. Also in the comment section below, I'd love to hear all your guys' thoughts regarding this topic, just because I know it's a very contentious idea in the speed dueling community, just because for the most part we are a fairly relaxed community when it comes to our play with Yu-Gi-Oh! But nevertheless, I feel like there is room for the idea of more advanced play in Speed Duels. So in the comment section below, share with me all your thoughts. I love engaging with you guys. You guys are always so interesting to talk to in the comment section below. So anything you think about, just let me know in the comment section below. Alright then, so before we do begin, I would like to ask that if you do end up enjoying today's video and would like to support the channel, then I would really appreciate if you can leave a like and subscribe to the channel. We are getting really close to 600 subscribers and it's really excited to hit that milestone. Alright, enough rambling on my side, let's actually get into discussing the idea of other alternative summoning mechanics in Speed Duels. So, when talking about this topic, the first mechanic that comes to mind is Synchros. It's the obvious next step for Speed Duels if we were to have continued with the format. Alright, so Synchros in Speed Duels. What are the pros and cons going into this? Well, obviously one of the big pros for Synchros into Speed Duels is that the gameplay becomes a lot more elevated, and therefore it becomes a lot more back and forthy, which Speed Duels already had, but the fact that it elevates it to a whole new echelon, just for the very fact that any given play you make has the alternative chance of being able to go into the extra deck to get a toolbox monster out of there, which I think is really fun. Not only that, but one of my all-time favorite formats is Edison format, and honestly I'm not alone on this, just because a lot of people tend to enjoy that format as well. So I think that the fact that it's a beloved format, it's fairly low level comparatively to like a lot of the other stuff in Yu-Gi-Oh! It could be a really easy slam dunk for Konami to introduce Synchros into the format. But as for the cons, well, first con up is the fact that because Speed Duels is such a relaxed format and has a much more, I guess, best way to describe it's casual audience, that means that not every single person that plays Speed Duels is familiar with Synchro summoning. So that means that the player base would have to go ahead and become familiar with a brand new summoning mechanic, which isn't the biggest deal just for the very fact that Synchros for the most part are fairly simple. The main thing that gets scary about Synchros is the fact that when you start getting into the more combo heavy Synchro decks, then at that point things start to steamroll. But even then, I still think that that couldn't be that big of a deal, just for the very fact that in Speed Duels we have limited zones, and while true that they had the same thing going on in Duel Links, I feel like in Speed Duels, because our skills aren't as crazy as the ones in Duel Links, because Duel Links skills are ridiculous. They're like, oh my god, they do everything for you, so it's a whole different beast. I feel like it could go ahead and create a very interesting scenario for Speed Duels instead. Additionally, I feel like with the fact that if we don't get any complicated Synchro monsters into Speed Duels, cards that have alternative summoning mechanics, one that comes to mind is like the Harpy Synchro monster, where it doesn't even need a tuner monster as long as you use like 2 Harpy cards as the materials, or like Chaos Angel that does a similar thing with light and dark monsters. As long as you don't introduce cards like those into the format, then for the most part, Synchro summoning is fairly simple, just because it's simple math with the addition of a tuner and a non-tuner monster. And I feel like most players could probably get their head around that idea. So for the most part, I don't think the addition of Synchro monsters would be that detrimental to Speed Duels as a whole. Now let's discuss the idea of Xyz cards. And Xyz monsters are this is where things get a little bit more complicated. Just for the very fact that Xyzes are a lot more readily available, for the very fact that they are significantly easier to summon comparatively to a Synchro that requires 2 different type of cards, a tuner and a non-tuner. For the example of the Xyz monster, those needs just 2 or more monsters of the same level that get stacked up on top of each other to summon out an Xyz monster. And this would for sure open up the floodgates for what could happen with speed duels. Alright, so some of the pros in my opinion regarding Xyz monsters. First pro up is the fact that at that point that we get Xyz monsters, the extra deck truly does become a toolbox. The very fact that duels at this point are going to become a lot more thought-provoking, just for the very fact that given any scenario in a duel, you'll have an entire extra deck that lets you navigate that to the best of your ability. Also, the fact that you have to take into account a lot more stuff that your opponent may have available to them adds a whole new dimension to the dueling. And for me, that's a pro just because I love intuitive Yu-Gi-Oh! But then we start dipping our toe into the cons regarding Xyz monsters. And I already alluded to this earlier. The fact that this does kind of open up the floodgates when it comes to the extra deck. Xyz monsters was the first mechanic to be truly available to any deck, just for the very fact that it has one of the easiest mechanics to summon out. And you know what, I forgot to mention this in the pros, but one of the pros for Xyz monsters is the fact that it is one of the easiest mechanics to learn. Next to links, Xyz monsters are genuinely extremely easy to understand, so that's definitely a pro. It's a much lower learning curve to learn the mechanic. But back to the cons now. The fact that Xyz monsters are so generic, it does mean that the gameplay is going to get elevated to a whole new point, and duels become a lot more complex, for lack of better words. And that could for sure be a definite turnoff for a lot of the player base for speed duels, just for the very fact that, as I mentioned, we are a much more relaxed format. And that's one of the charms that speed duels has going on for it. But nevertheless, I still do think that there is some value to potentially having something like an Xyz monster introduced into speed duels, for the very fact that if we only take into consideration the anime in itself, there is a lot of really cool archetypes that came out of the Xyz era, and that could have been really interesting to have seen in speed duels if we ever got to that point. So that's one of the main things that I have going on for that. And if we got skills oriented around these characters, then it could be definitely a really fun time. Now, let's talk about the more contentious mechanics. And you know what? With this idea, I'm just gonna go and pair them up, pendulums and links. And these are the hardest sells when it comes to introductions to speed duels, for the very fact that pendulum monsters are they're like the boogeyman of for people that are not super into Yu-Gi-Oh! Just for the very fact that it is, for all intents and purposes, a fairly non-intuitive mechanic, just for the very fact that it changes the way a lot of stuff works in Yu-Gi-Oh! For the very fact that you have monsters that simultaneously behave like spells, the fact that depending on where the card leaves, it goes either to the top of the extra deck and or the graveyard, stuff like that. Really makes it tough for players to get their minds and embrace the idea of a pendulum monster. Something you may not know about me is that I don't actually hate pendulums. I quite like a few pendulum strategies and have enjoyed playing with them. You guys are familiar with Big Bear 2000. Me and him have had a lot of duels in the past, and we even did a series on the channel where we went ahead and both began with 2 starter decks and kind of dueled against each other, and one of the decks that I used was the Pendulum Magician strategy. So I do have a soft spot for pendulums as a whole, but nevertheless, I still do think that even considering link monsters, I think that pendulums would be the hardest sell for speed duel players to wrap their arms around, just because it is such a foreign mechanic when you take a look at everything else in Yu-Gi-Oh! There really is no other mechanic quite like pendulums, and that's one of the biggest things that comes down to it. Realistically, there is only one pro that I can think of when it comes to pendulums, and that is the fact that the Arc V anime, in my opinion, had some of the best archetypes to come out of it. We had Fluffles, we had Performapals, we had Gem Knights was really cool. There's a lot of really awesome stuff that came out of those that era. Oh my god, I almost forgot Phantom Knights. I love that deck so much. There's so much really cool stuff that could have been introduced into the game if we had visited the Arc V era, but honestly the cons of Arc V would have been too much to overcome and might have actually just killed the speed duel format as a whole. And while we're talking about killing the format, let's talk about links. And links are, in my opinion, the easiest mechanic to learn, just for the very fact that based on the number of arrows a monster has, that's pretty much the amount of materials you need in order to make them. That's the simplest ways to explain it, but there is a few more complexities to that, but that's the case with every other mechanic, I feel like. Besides the fact that it is one of the easiest mechanics to learn, this is the mechanic that opens up the floodgates the worst, just for the fact that having Link 2, Link 1, Link 3s, etc., be available in the extra deck is really problematic, just for the very fact that your decks at this point don't really have to have any like cohesion to them. They can be just random assortment of monsters that are really good that can just at times go into an extra deck monster, which at this point I feel like would derive Yu-Gi-Oh! Speed Duels from what it is right now, where it's closer to like a roleplay aspect where you take a character that you like, take an archetype around that idea, and kind of just duel with your friends around that. Granted, I understand that the competitive landscape for Speed Duels is quite different to the casual play of Speed Duels, but nevertheless, I feel like the introduction of something like Links specifically would be like, it would be insane. Of course, like all the other formats, some of the pros for that is the fact that they're super easy to understand, at least how to summon them out. Then when you start getting to other interactions, then it starts getting a little bit more complex. But besides that, I'm not crazy familiar with the Arc V anime, so I can't say too much about the archetypes around that. I do know that some of the cooler archetypes that came out of Arc V were decks like Goki, Marincess, Salamangreats, Rockets. Those are all really cool archetypes that could have been interesting to see in Speed Duels, but I don't think they have the broad appeal that older archetypes have for the greater player base. So yeah, that's my thoughts around like pretty much all the mechanics that we've gotten introduced in Yu-Gi-Oh! So far. Now for my personal thoughts. What do I personally think would have been the best point for Speed Duels to have ended? And for me, I think it would have been Synchro era. I think that with the introduction of Synchros, Konami had so much available to them, just for the very fact that I think Synchros are probably one of the coolest mechanics to come out in general in Yu-Gi-Oh! I think the Synchro monsters look so clean, they look amazing, and I can only imagine how good they would look in that Secret Rare Speed Duel rarity. They would look unbelievably beautiful, especially like a Stardust Dragon. Whew, don't get me started. But also the fact that I do think that a condensed version of Edison would have been incredible to see in Speed Duels, especially if you can make character decks like you say be a bit more anime oriented, maybe make Leo's deck with the Morphtronics more playable. That could have been awesome. Make all these other characters that never saw the day of light in their own dedicated formats actually see playability in Speed Duels. The one character that kind of scares me when it comes to Synchro era is Crow with his Black Wing monsters, just for the very fact that when they were introduced into TCG at their time, holy hell, they were, oh my god, they were a beast of their own. They were incredibly powerful, but I feel like you could always choreate, like you could probably make changes to what cards Crow got in order to try and balance it out with like taking into consideration cards like Kalut could probably get omitted from his collection, just for the fact that Kalut just having to deal with a Kalut in Speed Duels is just, oh god, nightmare inducing. And stuff like that, you could probably really tone down how powerful the deck is in a way where you don't just completely neuter it. But besides that, yeah, I feel like there's just so much great stuff that could have been incorporated into Speed Duels if you had introduced Synchros into the format. But that's just me. I am very biased, as I mentioned. I love Edison format. 5Ds was probably my favorite of the series to watch. But yeah, in the comment section below, give me your thoughts. What format would you have loved to have seen Konami take Speed Duels till? Do you think we should have gotten up to Synchro era, maybe Xyz era? I can see a definite argument for Xyz era as well, but I feel like that's probably the point we were pushing it at. Do you think that Speed Duels was fine where it ended, or do you have an alternative opinion to that? Again, in the comments section below, share all your thoughts with me, and I look forward to engaging with you guys. Of course, do keep it civil. These are all opinions that we have. But with that being said, guys, I appreciate you guys making it all the way to the end of the video. If you did end up enjoying today's video and would like to support me, then I would really appreciate if you could leave a like and subscribe to the channel. But with all that being said, have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye.